Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 21 of the Day or Night in the Desert podcast with James and Zach. I'm James, and unfortunately, Zach will not be able to make it on this episode today. He had some personal things he had to deal with, but we will look forward to seeing him on future episodes going forward. But I'll still be here. We still got a lot of great content to get into today, and we're going to start out by talking about the NBA Finals, which the New York Knicks took Game 1 in San Antonio by a score of 105-95 on Wednesday night in San Antonio. Jalen Brunson led all scorers with 30 points, including 13 in the fourth quarter. Karl-Anthony Towns added 18 and 12, and OG Anunoby added 17 points, as well as the Knicks won their 12th consecutive playoff game and are only the 7th team in NBA history to achieve such a streak. And, the Knicks looked very, very impressive in that Game 1 victory. They were able to get a bunch of their guys involved in the scoring, as I mentioned, Anunoby, Karl-Anthony Towns, and obviously Jalen Brunson. Josh Hart was also a key contributor on defense and rebounding. He had 14 rebounds in the Game 1 win. So very, very impressive team effort from the New York Knicks. And one of the things that most impressed me about that win was their defense against Victor Wembanyama. We saw Victor Wembanyama missing an uncharacteristically high amount of shots. He obviously still had 26 points and 12 rebounds, but it was clearly not enough to get it done, and clearly he looked a little bit frustrated and a little bit sort of out of his rhythm in Game 1. It was also awesome to see the Knicks put forth such a great team effort. It was a very, very impressive game. Both teams were getting everybody involved. We saw a lot of good things from both sides, but the Knicks just were able to close it out in the late stretches of the game. They were down 14 points in the second half, and they erased that 14-point second half deficit to ultimately win by 10. So the Knicks played a very good second half. Jalen Brunson, he has that clutch gene. 13 points in the fourth quarter. Hit a very clutch shot in the paint in the final minutes. It was a great team effort on the part of the New York Knicks, and it was super exciting to witness it. I got to watch that game, and I picked the Spurs in 7 games. I'm going to stick to that, considering it's just one game. But the Knicks looked very impressive, and I was telling everybody to not sleep on the New York Knicks. And I think that they could win an NBA championship. They certainly have that potential, and they've really come alive in these playoffs. 12 straight wins, nothing to laugh at there. And so I'm just looking forward to seeing the rest of this series. I think we're in for a really good series. The Spurs also had Champagnie and Castle, who added 16 points and 17 points in the Spurs loss. Dylan Harper also had 16 points. And so the Spurs didn't have a lack of getting people involved. It's just it wasn't quite enough to ultimately get the victory over the toughness of the New York Knicks. We're going to move on to the Stanley Cup playoffs, where the Carolina Hurricanes have evened the series at 1 game apiece in a 4-3 overtime win in Game 2. The Hurricanes have now split the series in Carolina, but Vegas stole home ice, in Game 1 of this series. So we saw a lot of good things from the Golden Knights, who've obviously been super hot coming into this series. The Hurricanes do their part. They even the series at 1 game apiece. I had the Vegas Golden Knights in 7 games. I'm going to stick to that prediction. I think they're going to go back to Vegas and split another 2 games and go back to Carolina tied at 2 games apiece, and then split the next 2 to force a Game 7. But I have the Golden Knights coming out of that series in 7 games. They've just looked impressive throughout the playoffs. And one of the things that I think it gets me excited about is next season for the Utah Mammoth. We were the team that put up the best fight so far against the Las Vegas Golden Knights. And it just gives me a lot of optimism going forward that the Mammoth really have a chance to do some amazing things next year and going forward in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I think we're going to go at least to the second, maybe the conference finals rounds next year. And I think it's going to be an exciting time. There's been a lot of talk of us getting a guy like Dylan Larkin, the captain for the Detroit Red Wings. That's been a guy who's been a topic of conversation in a trade for us, so we'll have to see how that plays out. I'm looking forward to the Mammoth season next year. I'm looking forward to continuing to watch the rest of this Stanley Cup final, because it's been one of the most thrilling Stanley Cup playoffs in history, and I think it's just going to get better as this Stanley Cup final wears on. Got to get into a couple of other sports news here, and part of it involves NFL trades. It's been a big week in terms of NFL trades. The Rams have agreed to a trade with the Browns that will bring 5-time first-team All-Pro edge rusher Myles Garrett to LA in exchange for linebacker Jared Verse, a 2027 first-round pick, a 2028 second-round pick, and a 2029 third-round pick. Myles Garrett last year broke the single-season sack record with 22 sacks, and they're getting a guy who's been maybe the most productive and versatile defensive player in the National Football League over the last few seasons. Myles Garrett's just continued to get better and better. He was obviously a staple for the Cleveland Browns, but I am happy that he gets to go to a franchise that can contend for something. The Rams are coming off a season in which they were in the NFC Championship game with an MVP quarterback in Matthew Stafford, as well as Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. We've seen a lot from those guys as well, and I think that him coming to a defense that also added Trent McDuffie and other pieces is going to make this Rams team just pretty unstoppable next year, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do. I'm an Eagles fan, so it's maybe a disappointment for me as far as what's going on in the NFC, but the Rams, good for them. They have a killer team next year. I think that they're going to contend for a Super Bowl, and we have heard whisperings of Aaron Donald potentially coming out of retirement, so I'm not sure if I'm really buying into that. He has been out of the league for a few years now, but it would be cool to see Myles Garrett and Aaron Donald team up, and I think that's a scary thought for any other team in the National Football League, particularly if your team's in the NFC West, the Niners, the Cardinals, and the Seahawks. I have the Seahawks repeating next year. I thought they looked super good, and I thought a lot of their guys were coming back, so I do expect the Seahawks to be a threat, but this new Rams team, boy, if they can put those pieces together and they can get into the groove of things, they could be a really scary team next season, and clearly they're going all in to try to beat the Seahawks and ultimately win a Super Bowl, so I'm looking forward to that. The New York Giants have also signed receivers Odell Beckham Jr., Juju Smith-Schuster, and Braxton Berrios to add to their receiver room, and the biggest news on this is a reunion with Odell Beckham Jr. as a full circle moment. The wide receiver was drafted by the Giants in 2014 as the 12th overall pick in the NFL draft. Super exciting that Odell Beckham Jr. gets to reunite with the Giants. It's something I've kind of always wanted to see ever since he left to go elsewhere. I know he's not the same exact receiver that he was back then, has lost some athleticism, but I hope that he can revive his career there. I certainly think there's optimism for that. I know he's not young anymore, but I think that, a guy who means that much to that locker room and that team can rejuvenate his career in New York City. I don't think it'll be what it was, like I said, but it's an awesome thing for the city of New York, for the fans, and for the locker room in general to have a guy like Odell Beckham Jr., who used to be a leader there back, and you're combining him with a coach like John Harbaugh, and I think they could do some amazing things there. We've seen a lot of good things from them, but I'm looking forward to the NFL season and seeing what happens with all of these trades. But we got to get into some other sports because there's some interesting things going on in the world of soccer. The World Cup is coming up. We are going to cover that later on this podcast, but that isn't the topic for today. We got to talk about the Champions League final, which Arsenal is in an all too familiar position, losing the Champions League final to PSG 4-3 on penalties after a 1-1 draw. Declan Rice said that this cruel defeat won't define them and that Arsenal still remains without a Champions League title. They've played 226 European Cup games and Champions League matches, which is the most by any team that has never won the Champions League. It was also a sad ending to a historic run where Arsenal went 15 matches unbeaten, 11 wins, 4 draws. They're the only team in the modern era to go unbeaten in a UCL campaign and not win the trophy. Arsenal only trailed for 43 minutes the entire season. Very impressive season by Arsenal. They've been impressive the last few years, but have not been able to get over the hump in terms of the Champions League. And as I mentioned before, they've played the most Champions League and European Cup matches by any team that's never won it. And so I think to say the defeat won't define them is a little bit interesting because this is a team who's used to failure in these types of situations. It's a team that does not, as of now, have the culture to necessarily get over the hump, even after they've had a great year. They've gone undefeated. They hadn't lost a match. And so I think there needs to be more of a sense of urgency within that organization in terms of focusing on actually winning a Champions League. I think that needs to be addressed going forward with that squad. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the World Cup, but that's obviously big news in the soccer world. Got a couple of other things to discuss before I hop on out of here today. Mavericks guard Kyrie Irving gave an optimistic update on his ACL recovery this week that caused him to miss the entire 2025 and 2026 NBA season. He says, quote, "I am definitely close to being at 100% in terms of my ACL recovery. It's been a while now. I'm so grateful that I've had time to heal and experiment with my body more on the court and off the court in the weight room. And I'm just pushing myself to the limit." Irving hasn't played since he tore his ACL on March 3rd, 2025 against the Sacramento Kings. And remember, it was just 2 years ago that Kyrie Irving was in the NBA Finals against the Boston Celtics. I know they lost in 5 games, but Kyrie Irving, an instrumental player in the National Basketball Association, and it would be super exciting to have him back in Dallas to combine with Cooper Flagg and other guys, or to maybe even potentially be a trade piece to go elsewhere. We'll have to see how that all plays out, but good to see that Kyrie Irving is doing well and that he is enjoying his recovery and seeing the positives of it, and that he's close to coming back for that team. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Day or Night in the Desert podcast. Sorry Zach was unable to be here, but certainly hope he's doing good, and we will see him on the next episode. And I just want to thank everybody for continuing to support this podcast. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be able to do this with Zach and to be able to be a part of something so awesome. And we're just looking forward to continuing to see you guys on here. So thank you guys so much, and we will see you on episode 22 of the Day or Night in the Desert podcast with James and Zach. Thank you so much. See you next time.